The midnight call people always say a mother's love has no limits. I used to believe that without question. Looking back now, I realize love should never be blind. It should be kind, generous, and forgiving, but it should never ask you to lose yourself. My name is Ruth Walker. I'm 72 years old, born and raised in Texas, and this is the story of the night I gave away everything I had because my only son begged me to save him. It happened just after midnight. The shrill ring of my phone jolted me awake. The digital clock beside my bed read 12:11 a.m. At my age, unexpected calls after dark rarely bring good news. My hands shook as I answered. Mom, the voice on the other end barely sounded like my son Daniel. He wasn't speaking like the confident businessman everyone admired, he sounded terrified. Please, he whispered between shaky breaths. I don't know who else to call. I sat up immediately. Daniel, slow down. Tell me what's happened. There was a long silence before he finally confessed. I made a huge mistake. He explained that he had invested heavily in cryptocurrency after believing he could double his savings. Instead, the market collapsed. Desperate to recover his losses, he borrowed even more money. Without telling his wife Emily, he had taken out a second mortgage against their house. Now the payments had caught up with him. BlackRocks were calling every day. Legal notices had started arriving. If he couldn't pay within a week, the bank would begin foreclosure proceedings. I owe $80,000, he admitted quietly. If I lose the house, Emily will leave me. The kids will hate me. Mom, I'm drowning. I closed my eyes. $80,000. To some people, it might have been another number on a balance sheet. To me, it was nearly everything I had worked for during 45 years of cleaning motel rooms, working grocery registers, and stretching every paycheck farther than anyone thought possible. I looked around my small home. The faded curtains I'd sewn myself. The worn rocking chair my late husband built before cancer took him. The family photographs covering the walls. Everything I owned represented decades of sacrifice, yet none of it mattered as much as hearing my son cry. Please don't let me lose my family, he said. You're all I've got. After we hung up, I didn't sleep. Instead, I made coffee while the Texas sunrise slowly brightened my kitchen window. I prayed for his wisdom, but every prayer led to the same answer. He was my son. Whether he deserved saving wasn't the question I asked myself. Only whether I could live with saying no. That morning I drove to the bank carrying every financial document I owned. The loan officer reviewed my accounts for nearly an hour before looking up at me. Mrs. Walker, she said carefully, if you do this, you'll be giving up almost your entire retirement. I understand, you may even have to sell your home. I smiled sadly. A house can be replaced, I answered. A child can't. She nodded without another word and began preparing the paperwork. As I signed the first document, I had no idea I wasn't just rescuing my son. I was signing the first page of the greatest betrayal I would ever experience. Rehook. 2 weeks later, I handed Daniel a cashier's check for $80,000. He hugged me with tears in his eyes and promised he would spend the rest of his life repaying my kindness. I believed every word, until 6 months later, when he looked me in the eyes and told me to get out of his house forever. A promise that didn't last 2 weeks after that late-night phone call. Everything I had built over a lifetime was gone. I sold my little house to a retired couple who wanted a quiet place near the edge of town. I withdrew my savings, cashed out a large portion of my retirement fund, and signed the final paperwork with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. When the bank handed me the cashier's check for $80,000, it felt heavier than paper should. Daniel met me outside the bank. The dark circles beneath his eyes had faded, replaced by the relieved smile of someone who had escaped disaster. The moment he saw me, he wrapped his arms around me so tightly I could barely breathe. You saved us, Mom, he whispered. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. I smiled through tears. You don't owe me anything, I said. Just take care of your family. He insisted I move into his home. You've sacrificed enough, he told me. There's no reason for you to rent some tiny apartment. We have plenty of room, and the grandkids would love having Grandma here. His wife, Emily, smiled politely and agreed. It'll be nice, she said. We'll all help each other. For a while, it truly felt that way. Every morning I packed lunches for the children before school. I folded laundry, watered the flowers, cooked family dinners, and filled the house with the recipes Daniel had loved since childhood. Sunday afternoons became my favorite. The grandchildren crowded around the kitchen island, while I taught them how to make homemade biscuits, just like my own mother had taught me decades ago. Those moments made every sacrifice feel worthwhile. But happiness has a quiet way of changing. Around the third month, little things began to shift. Emily stopped asking me to join family outings. If I entered the living room while they were watching television, conversations suddenly ended. Daniel, once eager to tell me about his day, started spending longer hours at work. Even when he was home, his attention stayed fixed on his phone instead of the people sitting beside him. Then came the small insults. One afternoon, I found my favorite chair moved into the garage because it didn't match the furniture. Another day, my groceries disappeared from the refrigerator after Emily announced they needed more space. Whenever company visited, I noticed she introduced me differently. Instead of saying, "This is Daniel's mother," she'd simply smile awkwardly and say, "She's staying with us for a while." Those words lingered longer than she probably intended. One evening, while carrying towels upstairs, I overheard Emily talking on the phone. "I know it sounds awful," she sighed, "but it feels like we've lost our privacy. It's hard when someone else is always here." I froze halfway up the staircase. Someone else. Not family, not the woman who had emptied her life savings to keep this very house from being taken away. Just someone else. I quietly carried the towels to the bedroom and closed the door without making a sound. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, telling myself things would get better. Families go through difficult seasons. Misunderstandings happen. Surely Daniel would notice. Surely my son would remember everything we'd been through together. I had no idea that the worst moment wasn't behind me. It was waiting just 1 week away, over a homemade dinner I had prepared with love, where a single conversation would leave me questioning whether I had ever truly been welcome in the home I helped save. Rehook. The following Sunday, I placed Daniel's favorite casserole on the dinner table, expecting nothing more than a quiet family meal. Instead, before dessert was served, I would hear words that shattered my heart and set in motion everything that came afterward. Hassett Part 4. The signature. They never noticed. The little apartment I rented wasn't much to look at, but after everything that had happened, it became a place where I could breathe again. It sat behind an old church on a quiet street lined with pecan trees. The walls were thin. The kitchen was barely large enough for one person, and the windows overlooked an aging brick building. Still, every evening I made myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and reminded myself that peace is worth more than square footage. The first few weeks were the hardest, not because I missed the house. I missed my grandchildren. Birthdays came and went without a phone call. Thanksgiving passed in silence. Christmas morning arrived with no excited voices, no handmade cards, no hugs. I often wondered if the children even knew why Grandma had disappeared. Daniel never called. Neither did Emily. Eventually, I stopped expecting the phone to ring. Instead of dwelling on my heartbreak, I began volunteering 3 mornings a week at the church food pantry. The work gave me purpose. The people there never asked uncomfortable questions. To them, I was simply Miss Ruth, the older woman who always remembered everyone's name and never left without washing the coffee cups. Life became quiet, peaceful. Even then, nearly a year after I had been locked out, everything changed. My landlady, Mrs. Evelyn Carter, knocked on my door carrying the local newspaper. "I think you'll want to see this," she said gently. There, smiling across half the page, stood Daniel and Emily. The headline announced the grand opening of their new neighborhood cafe. According to the article, they had invested nearly everything they owned to turn their dream into reality. I smiled sadly. For a brief moment, I was genuinely happy they had built something meaningful. Then my eyes caught one sentence: to finance the business, the couple planned to complete the sale of their family home. I folded the newspaper carefully. They had forgotten, or perhaps they had never understood. 3 days later, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. It rang again, and again. Finally, I answered. "Mom?" Daniel's voice sounded nothing like the confident man in the newspaper photograph. He sounded frightened. "We've run into a problem." I waited quietly. "The buyers are ready," he continued. But the bank won't release the title. Why not? They say there's still a secured loan attached to the property. I already knew. The paperwork shows you're listed as the primary lender, he admitted. Apparently, they need your authorization before anything can move forward. There was a long silence between us, then he laughed nervously. It's probably just a technical mistake. It isn't. His breathing stopped for a moment. What do you mean? I remember every document I signed. When I agreed to save Daniel from bankruptcy, I had followed one piece of advice from the bank manager. She had looked me straight in the eyes and said, if you're risking everything, protect yourself. So instead of simply giving my son the money, the funds had been secured through a formal legal agreement. The property itself guaranteed repayment. Daniel had been too overwhelmed to read the documents. I had trusted him enough to believe I'd never need them. Now those papers were the only reason I still had a voice. Mom, he whispered. We? Honestly forgot? No, I answered calmly. You ignored it. Another long silence followed. Finally, he spoke again. I'm sorry. The words sounded unfamiliar, not because they were insincere, because it had taken losing control for him to say them. I treated you terribly. Yes, I replied quietly. I don't expect forgiveness, he continued. But please, without your signature we'll lose the cafe before it even opens. I looked out my apartment window at the afternoon sun stretching across the church lawn. A year earlier, I had begged for nothing more than kindness. Now my son was asking for mercy. Come see me tomorrow, I said. I'll listen, he thanked me over and over before hanging up. But I hadn't promised to sign anything. The next afternoon, there was a knock at my apartment door. When I opened it, Daniel and Emily stood side by side, looking more nervous than I had ever seen them. Neither of them knew that the folder resting on my kitchen table contained more than a signature. It contained a decision that would determine the future they had built. And whether they would finally understand that some debts cannot be erased with an apology alone. Re-hook, asterisk. As Daniel and Emily sat across from me in my tiny apartment, I placed a thick blue folder on the table. The moment they saw the repayment documents inside, the color drained from their faces, because they finally realized the woman they had thrown out still held every legal card. Part 5. What interest really means. Final part. Daniel and Emily sat quietly across from me at my small kitchen table. Neither of them reached for the coffee I had poured. The room was silent except for the ticking of the old clock hanging above the sink. I placed the blue folder between us. Daniel stared at it without speaking. I've read these papers 100 times, I said calmly. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted to remember the day I trusted my son with everything I owned. Emily wiped away a tear. We know we failed you. I slowly opened the folder and slid the documents across the table. The bank wasn't wrong, I explained. The loan was secured properly. Until it's repaid, I have legal rights. Daniel nodded without arguing. I know, I didn't come here to punish you, I continued. If that had been my goal, I could have started legal proceedings the day you locked me out. Both of them looked up in surprise, but I wanted to see whether regret would ever find its way back to this family. Daniel covered his face with both hands. I was ashamed, he admitted. Every time I thought about calling you, I remembered what I said that day. I didn't know how to face you. You should have thought about that before closing the door. I know. His voice cracked. I'm sorry, Mom. Not because I need your signature, but because I became someone I don't recognize anymore. For the first time since they arrived, I believed him. Real regret doesn't make excuses, it accepts responsibility. I reached into the folder and removed one final page. This decision. They both held their breath. I'm not asking for 12% interest. Daniel blinked. I'm not asking for $100,000. Emily looked confused. What I want cannot be deposited into a bank account. Tears rolled down Daniel's cheeks. What do you want? I want my grandchildren to know their grandmother wasn't abandoned because she stopped loving them. I want respect that doesn't disappear when money changes hands. I want you to understand that parents are not retirement plans, emergency funds, or disposable furniture. The room was completely still. Finally, I pushed a single sheet of paper toward them. It wasn't an invoice. It was a simple repayment agreement. Daniel would repay the original $80,000 over several years, in affordable monthly installments. Without financial penalties. Every payment would go into a college savings account for his children. It isn't about getting my money back, I said. It's about teaching the next generation that debts should be honored. Daniel broke down completely. He walked around the table and knelt beside my chair, just as he had done when he was a little boy asking forgiveness after breaking a window with a baseball. "I'm so sorry, Mom." This time, I believed those words, not because they erased the past, because they acknowledged it. Over the next 2 years, Daniel kept every promise he made. He never missed a payment. More importantly, he never missed another Sunday visit. Emily apologized many times, not with speeches but with actions. She welcomed me into their home whenever I wished to visit, though I chose to keep my little apartment. Independence, I had learned, is a gift worth protecting. The grandchildren slowly understood what had happened. As they grew older, I never spoke badly about their parents. Children deserve honesty, not bitterness. One spring afternoon, Daniel drove me past the cafe. It had become a success. Before I got out of the car, he looked at me and quietly said, "Mom, that business stands because you gave me a second chance. But our family stands because you gave me a chance to become a better man." I smiled. "The money was never the greatest debt you owed." He nodded. "I know. Years have passed since then. My rocking chair now sits on the porch of my little apartment, where I spend warm Texas evenings watching the sunset with a cup of tea. People sometimes ask whether I regret helping my son. The answer surprises them: no. I don't regret helping him. I regret believing love meant never expecting accountability. Love without boundaries creates entitlement. Love with wisdom creates character. If my story leaves you with anything, let it be this: forgiveness is a priceless gift, trust is earned, and the greatest interest you can ever collect isn't measured in dollars. It's watching someone finally become the person you always prayed they would be. The end. Asterisk. The door that closed behind following Sunday started like so many others. I woke before sunrise, tied on my favorite apron, and spent the morning making Daniel's favorite chicken casserole from scratch. The smell filled the house, reminding me of birthdays, little league victories, and family dinners when life felt simpler. My grandchildren wandered into the kitchen, sneaking bites of shredded cheese while I pretended not to notice. For a little while, everything felt normal again. We gathered around the dining table just after 6. The children chatted about school, and I quietly served everyone's plates. I hoped this meal might bring us back together. Instead, it became the beginning of the end. Emily cleared her throat and carefully folded her napkin. "Ruth," she began with an uncomfortable smile, "Daniel and I have been talking." Something in her voice made my stomach tighten. "We think it may be time for you to find a place of your own." The room suddenly felt much smaller. I looked at Daniel, expecting him to laugh and tell me she didn't mean it. Instead, he stared at his plate. "We're grateful for everything you've done," Emily continued, "but the house feels crowded. The kids are getting older, and we need more privacy." I waited just one sentence, one word from my son, but none came. After several long seconds, he finally spoke without lifting his eyes. "Maybe it's for the best, Mom." His words landed harder than I could have imagined. I forced a smile, even though my throat burned. "If that's what you both think," I said quietly, "I'll start looking." Nobody argued. Nobody said I didn't have to leave immediately. The children looked confused but stayed silent. Dinner ended in uncomfortable silence. Over the next several days, I began packing little by little. I didn't own much anymore. Most of my belongings fit into 2 suitcases and a few small boxes. I planned to leave as soon as I found an affordable apartment. I never got the chance. One rainy afternoon, I returned from buying groceries and discovered my key no longer fit the front door. I tried again, then again. Nothing. Thinking there had been a mistake, I rang the doorbell. No answer. I called Daniel straight to voicemail. Nearly 40 minutes later, his SUV pulled into the driveway. He climbed out without smiling. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I stared at him in disbelief. "I was about to ask you the same thing." "My key doesn't work." Emily stepped out of the passenger side. "We changed the locks," she said matter-of-factly. "You Changed the locks? Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. We thought it would make moving easier. I looked from one face to the other. My clothes are inside. We packed most of them, Emily answered. You'll figure something out. I felt the grocery bag slipping from my hands. Daniel, I whispered, I sold my home to save yours. For the first time, he looked directly at me. Instead of gratitude, I saw irritation. You keep bringing that up. Because it's true. No, he snapped. It was your decision. We never forced you to do it. I did it because you said you were desperate, and now you're making us feel guilty every day. I've never asked you for anything. He let out a bitter laugh. Really? You've been living here for months. We're the ones carrying you now. His words struck harder than the cold rain falling around us. I've cooked, cleaned, watched the kids. No one asked you to. Emily crossed her arms. We need our lives back. I could barely recognize the young man standing before me. Then he said the words that would echo in my mind for months. I'm tired of this, Mom. Just leave, and don't come back. For several seconds,